Hi, welcome. This is my second ever YouTube video. And I realized during my first ever YouTube video, I forgot to tell people the name of the channel, which is literature with a question mark at the end, because that's how I was feeling when I started this channel. So we're just going to roll with it. So welcome back. We're here to talk about books. And today the book we are going to be talking about is Enlightenment by Sarah Perry. This book takes place in 1997 in Audley, which is a small town in Essex in the UK. Two main characters are Thomas Hart and Grace Macaulay. They are kind of unlikely friends who are both members of the Strict and Particular Baptist Church. So Thomas is about 50. He's 50 years old, and he's a columnist at the local newspaper, and Grace Macaulay is almost turning 18, and she is a student. So the action really gets going when Thomas develops a new interest in astronomy, and Grace encounters a neighborhood boy bringing love into both of their lives. But these experiences challenge their faith and test their friendship to pretty devastating consequences. So the author, Sarah Perry, this is her fourth novel. I think she's best known for her bestseller, which was The Essex Serpent, and then the last one to come out was Melmoth. And she herself was raised in the Strict and Particular Baptist Church. She left the church in 2007 based on an interview I read with her. So now the name Strict and Particular, it doesn't refer to like a hardline, like persnickety group of Baptists. It describes this belief in restricted communion, which means that communion should only be reserved for those who have been baptized versus, just anybody who loves the Lord. The particular bit refers to the belief in particular redemption, which is this belief that Christ died to save a definite number of people and not just anybody who chooses to believe in him. And this is one of the 5 points of Calvinism, if you were so interested to know that. So you might be wondering, what does this definitive thing mean? And what that means is that there's this belief that there are a set number of names that are written in the book of life, which is like a heavenly register of the names of God's people. And only those people written in that book will, when they die, will go to heaven and reach salvation. And everybody else, whether you believe in God or not, if you're not in the book, it doesn't really matter what you do. So the Strict and Particular Baptists, they really reject contemporary culture, which you see in both Thomas and Grace, their characterization and like how they engage with the world around them. So for instance, I think this is really well kind of demonstrated in this description. This is when we're first meeting Thomas. It says, "A man of 50, Thomas Hart, and a man of Essex for his sins, tall and retaining as much hair as he had at 40, which is to say more above the collar than the brow. A face he does not deceive himself as handsome, but understands to be memorable. The nose not symmetrical, but of a pleasing, emphatic size. The eyes large, direct, and approaching green. An air altogether of occupying a time not his own. Might he be more at ease in an Edwardian living room, say, or in a pitching clipper's deck? Very likely." This is when Thomas is meeting a new character, and this is the character's impression of Thomas. This, he supposed, was Thomas Hart, whose letter and columns suggested a man who shed dust as he walked. I just really love that description. It just so brings to mind this image of a man who really does seem outside of his time. And this is kind of emblematic of both Thomas and Grace and the other members of the church, that they don't engage with contemporary culture. You could send a pop culture reference their way and they would just, boop, they would have no idea, right? So that's kind of very integral to, both of these characterizations. So Perry has spoken about her decision to leave the church in several interviews, saying that she left for multiple reasons, but one was the church's treatment of homosexuality. She didn't agree with it. And in a recent Guardian interview that she did to promote this book, she said this: "I have one toe in the sea and the remainder of my body on a more worldly shore, but I've never completely left." So we can see that being a member of this church would have very wide-ranging effects on somebody, and we're going to see that play out in both of our main characters. So the plot, what happens in this book? Well, so Thomas is a newspaper columnist, and he writes a column that isn't really like reporting. It's more like a lifestyle or an opinion column. He just kind of writes whatever is on his mind. And then one day his boss comes in and gives him like a little map of the stars and suggests that he might want to write about astronomy. At first he's very reluctant, but then one day he goes out at night and he looks up at the moon and he realizes, oh, you know what? I've never really looked at the moon and really studied it. And he becomes enamored, and this becomes like a new obsession for him. So in the town of Audley, there is like this old manor house that's, was once really grand, but now it's fallen into disrepair. It's kind of neglected. But it's said that it's haunted by this woman that you can sometimes see in the windows at night. And Thomas learns that one of the last owners of this house had a wife who disappeared. And so it's thought that this woman is the ghost. So Thomas becomes interested in this, and he figures out that this woman, who's named Maria Vaduva, was actually an amateur astronomer herself. And right before she disappeared, she may have made like a major discovery. So now Thomas is going to try to figure out, what happened to her and what was her discovery. And in doing that, he is going to be reaching out to a curator at a local like historical museum to see if they can find out anything. And this curator at the museum is going to become the love interest for Thomas. And Thomas is gay. He does not live openly because of his involvement with the church. This is going to be his arc. He's going to be trying to figure out what happened to Maria and what was her discovery. And he's also going to be experiencing this attraction to this other man who happens to be married and may or may not return his affection. Now, Grace. Now, her mother died in childbirth, and she's been brought up by her father, who I think is a preacher in the church, and her aunt. And her aunt is is loving. She takes really good care of her, but she is a little cold. She's not like a very warm personality. One day, her aunt brings her to church, and Thomas just sees her and has an instant connection with this infant, which is strange because Thomas never wanted to have a family of his own. He doesn't want to be depended on by anybody or have any responsibility. So this takes him totally off guard, but develops this feeling of wanting to look after Grace. And then as Grace grows up, they develop like a genuine communal friendship. Grace is about to turn 18, so she has some really big decisions to make in her life coming up. Not only, finishing school and what is she going to do next, but also whether or not she's going to be baptized in the church, because this is a church that they wait until somebody is old and an adult and chooses to join the church. Kind of by chance, she meets a boy named Nathan who's a little bit older than her. He is not in the church, and he's going to expose her to a wider world, and she's also going to fall in love with him, and she's going to experience all the tumult of, first love, which is, it's a doozy, right? So just as Thomas is questioning his faith because of the attraction he has to this other individual, she too is going to be questioning her faith because of her love. So while this is ostensibly a story about the mystery around Mary Duval, really I think this is a story about this friendship and whether two people who love each other can hurt each other deeply, forgive each other, and continue that friendship. Is that possible? So Perry's prose is just very beautiful. She's a very lyrical writer. Her descriptions of characters are so evocative, and the way that she describes weather and the landscape really brings Audley alive. And her skills, I think, though, are a little tested when she starts to describe action. Like there's a particular scene, it's at a fair, and there is an accident on one of the rides, and there's kind of like a rush of people, and one of the characters gets injured. And it's kind of written almost like a fever dream, but like the character whose perspective we're getting this scene from is awake and they're completely sober. So I don't know why it's written that way, but I have to tell you, if you asked me like what happened physically in this scene, I could not tell you. And so I think that is one of the areas where I think Perry gets a little lost is describing like physical actions. Another thing that was a little curious to me was Mary Vaduva appears as a ghost to Thomas throughout the novel, but I was never certain if she was an actual apparition or if this is just Thomas's imagination. He does seem like a very lonely person. He spends a lot of time alone, and I did wonder, did he just like start talking to an empty chair and just imagine Maria being there, or if she really did appear to him? That was never particularly clear. And the other thing about Maria is that, there are really two mysteries around her. A, what happened when she disappeared, and B, what did she discover right before she disappeared? And we don't get both of those mysteries answered. And I really felt like only one of those mysteries was Perry actually interested in, because none of the characters really take any actions or do anything to actually find out the answer to the other mystery. So I felt like that was kind of lopsided, and it didn't affect my satisfaction with the ending, but it was a little curious to me. It did kind of feel like her fate was a bit of an afterthought. Thomas and Grace are already kind of like, oh, it's an unlikely friendship, but there are a lot of friendships in this that felt very unlikely to me. So much so that it got almost like a bit that Perry was doing. It kind of stretched believability. Like, why would all of these people who really have nothing in common or very little in common, how would they all find themselves together in one group? Another thing was that many of the clues that kind of revealed the mystery around Maria were discovered by like luck or chance. Someone just so happened to come across some information. So there's not really a lot of like sleuthing or any actions taken by the characters to find this stuff out. Now, since one of the book's theme is about astronomy and, is our fate written in the stars, that sort of thing, these coincidences kind of could be like supporting the theme in one way. They became less and less convincing as they kind of piled up. Now, the novel covers 20 years and it's told in sections, so there are quite big like time jumps between those sections, and that did slow down the reading experience for me a little bit, having to kind of leave one section behind and like dip into a new time and having to figure out, oh wait, where are all of our characters? What's happened between now and then? That did slow things down for me. It wasn't a major impediment to me like keeping going and finishing the novel. I really enjoyed reading this. Obvious that Perry is super interested in astronomy herself, and she wrote about it really well. She explained a lot of astronomy like theories and things like that in a way that I could really understand, which I have no background in that. So, and she also really, I feel like she shared her wonderment in astronomy, how like fantastic it can be to realize how vast the universe is and how little we are. I was really invested in these characters. I cared about the outcome. I cared about whether or not these characters are going to forgive each other and come to a place of peace with their place in their church. And I was quite satisfied with the ending. I would say, like, compared to some of Perry's other work, I felt like The Essex Serpent, I really enjoyed that one, but it did feel a little like she pulled her punches. I mean, some of her characters made terrible decisions and did things, deceived each other, lied, betrayed each other. But then at the end, I felt like nobody really faced any consequences for these really terrible choices. I had the feeling like Perry didn't want to let her characters suffer. But I felt like in Enlightenment, she let her characters suffer and she let them face the consequences for their actions. And so this felt more, I would say, emotionally honest and just like more realistic, because I felt like in Essex Serpent, I'm like, would people really react this way? Would people really behave this way? Like, I'm not convinced. But this felt more real to me. Yeah, so I highly recommend that one. If you've read it, please leave a comment and let me know if you liked it. Yeah, so this is my second YouTube video, as I said, so I'm still starting out here. It would mean so much to me if you could like this video, so maybe more people could see it. If you're interested in getting more reviews like this one, it would be super cool if you could subscribe. So yeah, okay, and I just realized, I think at the beginning, I said the name of this channel, which is Literature, but I didn't introduce myself. I am Ella. Thank you for stopping by. I'm going to get really good at YouTube.